It's good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on the time you're watching this video tutorial. My name is Jeremiah Opisa Samuel, your favorite tutor, the man that explains complex concept and breaks it down to the level you understand it and you don't need to struggle to remember again. So today we'll be discussing the adjustment of isotonicity in parenteral products, a practical guide for both pharmacy students and the people that are already practicing pharmacy. So we'll be discussing how to adjust products that you need to administer via other routes other than oral route, and how you can go about this. So at the end of this video tutorial, you'll be able to do your calculations and everything, be able to come up with solution to difficult problems. So what's the outline of today's tutorial? We'll be discussing what is tonicity, the different types of tonicity, why does it matter in the preparation of parenteral products, and what are the methods available to adjust parenteral products to isotonicity. Then we discuss the freezing point depression method. We look at the step-by-step procedures and how to go about it. Then examples as well as solutions to the question I'm going to give you, and the conclusion of the whole matter. So if you are ready, I'm ready for you to. Let's dive straight into the tutorial. So what is tonicity? What is tonicity? Tonicity refers to the ability of an extracellular solution to make water move into or out of a cell by osmosis. So tonicity, you can consider tonicity as a characteristic of a solution administered into the body, and the ability of this solution to cause the movement of fluid in and out of the cell, in or out of the cell. So what gives a solution this property? It is dependent on the solute content of that solution. What are the contents of that solution? So the concentration of the solutes in that particular solution is what it gives it its tonicity. So it is determined by the concentration of the non-permeable solutes, that is the solute that cannot cross the cell membrane easily. So that's what determines the tonicity of a particular solution. And you know, your pure water without any solute is absolutely does not have any tonicity. So you can consider that as a solution with zero tonicity. So quickly, what are the types of tonicity? There are three major categories. Depending on how those solutions interact with the intracellular fluid once they are taken into the body. So number one is your isotonic solution. So those type of solution, once you take them in, their concentration is not different from the concentration of the intracellular fluid, that is the fluid found inside the cell. Let me give you an example. Let's say this is your cell, your intracellular space, and this is your extracellular space. Yeah, extracellular space. So the concentration here of solute is the same thing as the concentration here. So there is no movement of solute from water from here to here or from here to here, because the concentration are even. I don't know if you get, the concentration are even. So the whole concept of the movement of fluid is to maintain homeostasis, because the body will want to balance any external disturbance. So if there is a disturbance from the outside world, the body tends to adjust itself to make sure that it balances the change. So in isotonic solution, they do not cause any movement of water from the intracellular space. So no net water movement, the cell stays the same size. An example of such isotonic solution is the 0.9% sodium chloride, which is the normal saline, and 5% dextrose in water. So if you take 0.9% normal saline, your urine output remains the same because your body doesn't notice any change in volume. But if you take 0% sodium chloride, water contains 0% sodium chloride, you tend to urinate more. Why? Because your body is trying to get rid of the excess water so as to maintain isotonicity. Now, number two, hypotonic solution. Hypotonic solutions, they are solutions with concentration lesser than the concentration of the cell. You get? So the the solute concentration of those solution outside the cell is way lower than the concentration of your normal cell, the cells in your body. So what will happen? Because of course the body will want to balance homeostatically, that is homeostasis will want to occur. Fluid will start moving out of the cell to out of this extracellular space. Now the solution you just took, the fluid will begin to move into the cell, so that it can dilute the cell, such that the intracellular fluid as well as the extracellular fluid can have the same concentration, and this can lead to cell swelling if the cell cannot contain the amount of fluids entering, and it can lead to bursting, lysis and stuff like that. Example of hypotonic solution is 0.45% sodium chloride. You can see that 0.45% sodium chloride is way lesser than 0.9% of sodium chloride. Yeah, is way lesser. 0.9, 0.5. 0.5 is way lesser. Now we're talking about your hypertonic solution. Hypertonic solutions are solutions whose concentrations are way higher than the concentration of the intracellular space or the intracellular fluid. So in this kind of case, water moves out of the cell to come and dilute the concentration of the solution you just introduced into the body, and this will lead to the shrinking of the cell. Example is your 3%. See, 3% sodium chloride. 3% is way higher than 0.9%. So those are the three types of solution of tonicity that we have. Now let's dive into the next slide. Now, why does tonicity matter in parenteral preparations? Parenteral preparations, they are preparations you give via IV, intravenously, intramuscularly, subcutaneous, infusions, eye drops, and stuff like that. So anything that you do not take through your oral route, they are all termed parenteral preparations. That is, they are bypassing the enteric system. So why do we need to care about tonicity when preparing such preparations? Number one, if a parenteral preparation is not isotonic, just as we've seen in the previous slide, if it is hypotonic, you see that there will be hemolysis. That is, there will be movement of water into the red blood cells, so that this water can dilute the concentration of the red blood cells, because the red blood cell relative to the hypotonic solution that you've just introduced into the body is too concentrated. So the body will tend to dilute this red blood cell, and this can lead to cell bursting, right? The red blood cells can burst, and the content of the red blood cell become exposed to the body. If you give a hypertonic solution, an injection or an eye drop, it can lead to the shrinking of the red blood cell, because fluid will move out of the red blood cell to dilute that concentrated solution. So all this whole process will lead to pain, to irritation, to tissue necrosis, right? To pain, irritation, tissue necrosis, even shock in severe cases. So it is important, therefore, that we adjust to isotonicity when preparing parenteral products. Now, what are the methods available to adjust isotonicity of parenteral products? We have various methods available. We have the freezing point depression method, the sodium chloride equivalent method. Let me mark it like, okay, here's the freezing point depression method. The freezing point depression method. Then we have the sodium chloride equivalent method, the adjusting the concentration of the solution through dilution or concentration. But for the sake of this tutorial, we are going to stick to the freezing point depression method. The freezing point depression method here. So we'll be discussing specifically the freezing point depression method. So let's quickly dive into the principle. Now, freezing point depression method for isotonicity adjustment. What is the principle behind it? What is the principle behind it? The first thing you must take note of is that water normally freezes at 0 degrees Celsius. So ordinary water, water without solute, water without anything, pure water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius. And of course, it boils at 100 degrees Celsius. Introducing any substance, any solute, be it an electrolyte, be it a sugar, any substance you introduce into water leads to the depression of its freezing point. It lowers the freezing point in proportion to the number of the solute particles. That is, water with salt will freeze at a lower temperature compared to the normal water. That is why in lands in some countries where there are ice on the road, they have ice on their road and vehicle cannot pass around. They tend to sprinkle salt on the road so that to reduce the freezing point. And at 0 degrees Celsius, the road will still be available for movement. Whereas if there is no introduction of salt, the road becomes, there is ice, buildup of ice on the road. So now human tears and body fluids, of course the human tears and body fluids, they are not pure. They are watery, they are liquid, but they are not pure water. That is, they have solute, they contain solute. I don't know if you, most likely if you've have a taste of, if you tasted your tears, you discover that it is a bit salty. So your human tears is not made up of pure water. So the body fluids too, they all have solutes resident in them, endogenous solute, and this has reduced the freezing point of all body fluids and tears to 0.5 to minus 0.52 degree Celsius, as seen here. Minus 0.52 degrees Celsius, minus 0.52 degrees Celsius, as seen here. So this is the freezing point of tears and body fluid. So any ophthalmic or injectable solution that you want to introduce into the body must as well have that same freezing point of 0.52 minus 0.52 degrees Celsius. So anything lesser than this or greater than this will definitely provide or will definitely produce trouble. You can categorize any solution outside this freezing point depression, or outside this particular freezing point of minus 0.52. You can consider it as a solution that is either hypertonic or hypotonic, and you need to adjust it back to this particular freezing point. So we want to be using the freezing point of certain solution to see how we can adjust the isotonicity of parenteral products. So now, every drug or solute causes a certain freezing point depression when it is dissolved in water. If the drug solution alone does not reach minus 0.52 degrees Celsius, we now need to add an adjusting substance or an adjusting agent. The common one is your sodium chloride, until the total freezing point depression is equal to 0.52 degrees Celsius. So if the content of your solution, the drug, probably you want to prepare atropine sulfate eye drop. So if the content of atropine in that solution doesn't depress the freezing point up to down to 0.52 minus 0.52 degrees Celsius, you will need to now introduce something external, something from outside, adjusting agent, to reduce the freezing point further. So we are making progress. Let's look at the step-by-step procedure to carry this out. All right, so now the first step is this. If you're given a question or you are to prepare a product, the first thing you do is to determine the freezing point depression produced by the drug. The product you want to produce, the eye drop you want to produce. An eye drop is not an empty water, it has something in it. We can call it the active ingredient. We have to now determine how far or how much depression in the freezing point will this particular active ingredient produce. Although a table exists that lists the freezing point depression caused by 1% solution of many drugs, I believe your lecturer or your tutor, or you can get this online, your lecturers can provide this for you too. Now, for example, a 1% solution of atropine sulfate will depress freezing point of water by minus 0.086 degrees Celsius. And if you look at this value very well, this value here, it is not up to minus 0.52 degrees Celsius. It's not yet at that very particular value. So you will need something to reduce the freezing point further to minus 0.52 degrees Celsius, which is the normal freezing point depression, freezing point of tears and body fluid. So now what's the step 2? Calculate the freezing point for your actual concentration. So you already know the freezing point depression produced by just 1% of the solution of atropine sulfate. But in your medication or in your production, in your product, you might be using 0.5% of atropine sulfate, 1.2% of atropine sulfate, 0.06% of atropine sulfate, depending on what you are producing. So you now need to calculate the freezing point depression for this actual concentration. And since depression is proportional to concentration, the freezing point depression of the drug will now be the freezing point depression produced by 1% multiplied by the concentration of the drug. It's that simple. FPD for 1% of the drug multiplied by the concentration of the drug. Now, what's the third step? You now need to find how much more depression is needed to get to minus 0.52. So the freezing point depression needed will be 0.52 minus the freezing point depression of the drug. Yes, of the drug. That is, I'm coming. Yeah, the freezing point depression of the drug here is the value you get after doing this calculation. Yes, after doing this particular calculation. So what you get here, what you are going to input as your value here is what you get after you do this calculation. After you do this calculation. So now let's quickly go to step 4. Now, step 4, after you've done step 1, 2, and 3, you now need to calculate how much sodium chloride or any other adjusting agent you need to add, because already the freezing point depression produced by the drug has not gotten to minus 0.52. So you need to calculate how much sodium chloride or adjusting substance. It might not be sodium chloride, it might be anhydrous dextrose, it can be any other thing that you need to adjust to isotonicity. So how do you do that? Let's consider sodium chloride. Let's say that sodium chloride is the adjusting agent. 1% of sodium chloride solution depresses the freezing point by minus 0.576 degrees Celsius. Look at it, 1% produces this depression, freezing point depression, right? Just 1% produces this freezing point depression. So that is why 0.9% should produce something 0.5 lesser than, that's probably 0.52, 0.53 or something like that. So that is why 0.9% of sodium chloride depresses by 0.52. Why? Because 1% depresses by minus 0.576. Yeah, that is why normal saline is isotonic. So what's the formula for calculating the amount of adjusting agent or the amount of sodium chloride that you need to add? You will divide the freezing point needed, right? The freezing point needed. This is the freezing point needed. What you got from here. Let me show you what you got from here. What you got from here. The freezing point needed. Yeah. What you got from there. You are going to divide that. You are going to divide that freezing point needed by the freezing point produced by 1% sodium chloride or 1% of your adjusting substance. So if you're using sodium chloride, your the value we'll be talking about here will be this, minus 0.576 will be this, or as provided if you are not using sodium chloride, if it is any other adjusting agent. So now, having said this, I think it is time for us to take an example. Let's work on an example. Yeah. All right. Woo. Okay, so we have an example, a question. So this is a question. Prepare. This is the question. This is the question. This is a question. This is a question. So prepare an isotonic solution, an isotonic 1% solution of atropine sulfate using sodium chloride as an adjusting agent. So here we are asked to use sodium chloride as an adjusting agent, and we are preparing 1% solution of atropine. And what does 1% means? It means that 1 gram of atropine, 1 gram of atropine is present in 100 ml of water. So that is what 1% means. It means 1 gram of atropine is present in 100 ml of water. So we are now asked to adjust or to prepare this solution and use sodium chloride as an adjustment. So from I told you before earlier that you need to, the first step is to calculate the freezing point depression produced by the drug or the active ingredient of your solution. Here, the active ingredient is your atropine sulfate. So from table, 1% atropine sulfate depresses the freezing point by minus 0.086 degree Celsius. Minus 0.086 degrees Celsius is not the same as minus 0.52. Remember, our target is to reduce the freezing point of this 1% solution to minus 0.52. So now, since it is not up to minus 0.52, what do? Our solution, which is 1% of, which is 1% solution, the freezing point depression produced by the atropine sulfate is this. The needed depression such that we get to minus 0.52 will be 0.52 minus 0.086, which will be 0.434 degrees Celsius. So we need to depress the freezing point of the solution further by 0.434 degrees Celsius so that we can get 0.52 degree Celsius depression in freezing point. How do we do that? That is where sodium chloride comes into the game. So now, sodium chloride needed in percentage will now be the freezing point depression needed, that is the needed depression, right, which is 0.434 degrees Celsius, divide by the freezing point of freezing point depression produced by 1% sodium chloride. And remember, the freezing point depression produced by 1% sodium chloride is 0.576. That is why you have this divided by this, and you get 0.75%. And what is the implication of this value? It means that we need to add 0.75 gram of sodium chloride in 100 ml of 1% atropine sulfate solution to make this solution isotonic. You get the gist now. So it's very simple, it's very straightforward. Now, I want you to think with me for a moment. If this preparation, if this 1% solution of atropine sulfate using sodium chloride as an adjustment, let's assume we didn't adjust with sodium chloride to isotonicity. I'm asking you a question now. What do you think would have happened to the person if the person probably took this preparation as an eye drop? If we didn't adjust to isotonicity using sodium chloride, what would have happened? Would this have been a hypotonic solution or a hypertonic solution? And what would have happened to the physiology of the person? I want you to drop the answer in the comment section. I'm reading your answers, I'm going through your answers, and I will give you a reply. So now, let's take further example to drive home the point and see and establish our understanding about the concept. Okay, more examples. Now, another example, another question before us. It said, calculate the weight of anhydrous dextrose required to render 1 liter of aqueous solution containing 0.234% weight in volume of sodium chloride and 0.0745% weight in volume of potassium chloride, isotonic with blood plasma. Amazing question. Now, if you look at this question critically, We are not using salt or sodium chloride as our adjusting substance. We are using what? Anhydrous dextrose. That is the adjusting substance. Anhydrous dextrose. That's the adjusting substance. And what does our solution contains? 1 liter of this solution contains 0.234% of sodium chloride and 0.0745% weight in volume of potassium chloride. I can probably predict that this solution is an infusion because it contains electrolyte needed by the body. It might be something probably to replace the body fluid. So now this is the solution we want to prepare, but we want to adjust this to isotonicity using anhydrous dextrose. How do we go about this? What are the processes involved? I'm going to walk you through it step by step. And at the end of the day, you'll be able to solve any questions provided during your exam, during your test, or in practice. So let's go deep into it. Now, there are some parameters provided alongside the question. The first one here is the freezing point depression produced by 1% sodium chloride, which is 0.576, right? 0.576 as stated in the question. The next thing you need to know is the freezing point depression produced by 1% weight in volume of potassium chloride, which is minus 0.439 degrees Celsius. Now, the last thing you need to know is the freezing point depression produced by 1% weight in volume of your adjusting substance. Remember, AD is your adjusting substance, which is the anhydrous dextrose in this question. Anhydrous dextrose, that is the adjusting substance used in this particular question for this particular solution. So the freezing point depression method, produced by 1% weight in volume of anhydrous dextrose is minus 0.101 degree Celsius. With all this information provided, I'm sure that we'll be able to solve this question. We'll be able to solve this question in as much as those informations have been provided. So let's go into the solution for this question. Now, what is the solution? Let's take it stepwise. First of all, you need to calculate the freezing point depression provided by the content of your solution. In this question, the content of your solution is sodium chloride and potassium chloride. So the first thing, let's start with sodium chloride. You are provided with 0.234% of sodium chloride. How do you get the freezing point depression provided by 0.234%? You multiply this percentage here by the freezing point depression that sodium chloride would have provided, assuming sodium chloride was 1%, which is 0.576, and that gives us 0.1348. So in this particular solution, 0.234% sodium chloride is depressing the freezing point by just 0.1348 degrees Celsius. 0.1348 is not up to 0.52. But the good news is that it's not only sodium chloride that's in the solution, we also have potassium chloride. So let's see what potassium chloride is bringing to the table to depress the freezing point. So potassium chloride here, the percentage provided in the solution is 0.0745% potassium chloride. So we multiply it by the freezing point depression provided by 1% potassium chloride, which is 0.439. If you do that, you get 0.0327. So 0.0327 is the freezing point depression that 0.0745% potassium chloride will produce, assuming it is alone in the solution. But fortunately for us, we have both sodium chloride and potassium chloride in the solution. So we now need to add the freezing point depression provided by sodium chloride and potassium chloride. So the total freezing point depression provided by the two contents by the contents of our solution will be 0.1348. This one is coming from the sodium chloride here, and 0.0327 provided by the potassium chloride, and we have what? 0.1675. So this is the freezing point depression provided by the content of the solution, sodium chloride and potassium chloride. So, but we have a challenge. The challenge is this: the drug or the electrolyte inside the solution has not provided a reasonable amount of depression, of freezing point depression, for us to leave the solution and not adjust to isotonicity, because 0.1675 is still not up to 0.52. So the needed freezing point now will be 0.52 minus this, which is 0.1675, which will give me 0.3525. What does this mean? It means that I need to depress the freezing point of this solution containing sodium chloride and sodium chloride and potassium chloride by 0.3525 further. So this is where your adjusting substance and anhydrous dextrose come into the show. So, and it's the adjusting substance that will now provide this depression. So now, the weight of adjusting substance required will now be the needed freezing point depression divided by the freezing point depression of 1% adjusting substance, which is the anhydrous dextrose. So the freezing point needed is the 0.3525 divided by the freezing point depression produced by 1% adjusting substance, which is anhydrous dextrose. So if you do the math, 0.3525 divided by 0.101, you get 3.49% weight in volume. And what does this mean? It means that 3.49 grams of anhydrous dextrose is needed to adjust 100 ml of solution to isotonicity. So that means 3.49 grams of anhydrous dextrose is needed to adjust 100 ml of solution to isotonicity. But remember, let's go back to our question. Our question says, calculate the weight of anhydrous dextrose required to render 1 liter, not 100 ml, 1 liter of aqueous solution. So we just calculated for 100 ml. We now need to calculate for what? 1,000 ml, which is the same as 1 liter if you do the conversion. 1,000 ml. 1,000 ml is equal to what? 1 liter. So that is the relationship between a ml and a liter. So 1,000 ml is equal to 1 liter. So we need to calculate for 1,000 ml. So 3.49 gram of anhydrous dextrose is needed to adjust 100 ml of solution to isotonicity, but the question says 1 liter or 1,000 ml of solution. Now, if 3.49 gram is needed for 100 ml of solution, then 3.49 times 1,000, everything divided by 100, is what is needed for 1,000 ml. So, having done that, that means we need 34.9 grams of anhydrous dextrose to adjust 1,000 ml of solution to isotonicity. If you are confused, how many 100 ml will you find in 1,000 ml? So that is like 1,000 divided by 100. So you find which will give you 10. So you will find 10 100 ml in 1,000 ml. So you just need to multiply your weight by this 10. So that will be 3.49 times 10, which will give us 34.9 grams. So we need 34.9 grams of anhydrous dextrose in this 1,000 ml of solution containing sodium chloride and potassium chloride to adjust it to isotonicity. So It's quite straightforward. So I just need to go and add 34.9 grams to this solution and I'm good. Now, in conclusion, this whole process, probably you are saying it's too long, we've talked a whole lot. What is the shortcut? We have a shortcut, a very sharp formula for you. The whole process can be shortened into a very simple formula. The weight of the adjusting substance in percentage weight per volume is given by 0.52 minus A, right? 0.52 minus A, all right? 0.52 minus A over B, where A is the freezing point depression produced by the content of the solution. That is, in this case, in the previous question, the content of the solution now with potassium chloride and sodium chloride. And B is the freezing point depression produced by 1% of the adjusting substance. In the previous question, our adjusting substance is anhydrous dextrose, whereas in the first example we took, the adjusting substance was sodium chloride. So using this formula, you can straightforward get your answers. Now, thank you for watching. I'm pretty sure you've learned a lot in this short tutorial. Thank you for watching up to this moment. Drop your questions in the comment section if you have any questions, and subscribe to this channel if you've not. Here is where we demystify every complex concept. You can go through some of the videos I've already uploaded. Any other difficult topics you want me to talk about, you want me to do a tutorial on, type the topic in the comment section. And if you want to be a part of our Telegram channel where you get quick updates about any uploaded videos, you can join our Telegram group chat in the description attached to this video. So thank you for watching. I will see you at the top. Peace.